Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm going to talk to you today about the Pacific Theater of World War II. Okay, today is December 7th here in South Korea. It's the anniversary of Pearl Harbor. And many Americans particularly know the details about Pearl Harbor, so I don't feel like I should do a video on that because most Americans know the details of the Battle of Pearl Harbor. I'm going to talk about the Battle of Saipan. Okay, many Americans have seen the movie Wind Talkers, and Wind Talkers talks about it a little bit, but the movie Wind Talkers does not go in detail about the battle. That wasn't the main part of the movie. It's a good movie, and I encourage people to watch it. But I want to provide details about the battle. Excuse me, I'm at the coffee shop, and people just came down this walkway right here, so I had to move away from the camera a little bit. Okay, talk about the Battle of Saipan. Okay, from June 15th, 1944 to July 9th, 1944. 24 days of fighting. The U.S. Marines and the U.S. Army, and the U.S. Navy, they took the island of Saipan. Okay, the island of Saipan had been under Japanese control since 1922. Okay, this is the first time in the war that the U.S. soldiers go to Japanese soil that was not conquered by the Japanese. Saipan had been Japanese soil for a long time, and it was not conquered by the Americans. Okay. And Saipan was only 1,200 miles from mainland Japan. So if the U.S. captured Saipan, they could use the airfields to launch bombers and bomb Japan, which will make the airmen's job a lot easier. Okay. The original naval bombardment force, the Navy that bombed the island of Saipan, it consisted of 2 battleships, 2 cruisers, and 7 destroyers. Okay, and behind them was a force of 70,000 U.S. Marines and soldiers, predominantly Marines, but there were a few U.S. Army soldiers as well. All right. And when the U.S. Marines landed, when they were going to land, they were several miles away from shore, and the Navy continued the bombardment. And the U.S. Marines felt like they could not concentrate with all the noise from the bombardment bombing the targets of Saipan. Many of the U.S. Marines compared that noise to like a freight train. Okay, and a lot of this I'm getting from the Lost Evidence History channel. I'd show Lost Evidence of Pacific Theater of World War II, and that's a very good show, very good details of the battles. I encourage people to watch those videos. All right, and aerial reconnaissance. The U.S. did a lot of aerial reconnaissance before they landed on the island of Saipan. They took photographs of the island, and the photographs were so good that a lot of the U.S. Marines could see the chicken houses that a lot of the farmers in Saipan had. That's how detailed and that's how accurate those photos were. All right. The U.S. Marines land. The first day they take the beaches, okay? But the Japanese forces commanded by General Saito, they hold the high ground. And progress, particularly for the first few days, was very, very slow. And on day 2, Japan had a tank counterattack. They counterattacked with a bunch of tanks. Well, it did not succeed. The U.S. Marines held off the Japanese counterattack. They stopped the Japanese counterattack. Japan did not push the U.S. Marines back. The U.S. Marines destroyed 24 Japanese tanks on the second day. That's how tough and how efficient the U.S. Marines were. Okay. The U.S. Marines push forward. Okay, when they get to the sugar factory and the sugar canes, this is where some difficulty started occurring. Okay. Example, there was a Japanese scout on the chimney at an abandoned sugar factory. And he was a scout, and once he saw the U.S. Marines there, he ordered Japanese artillery fire to fire on the Marines. Eventually, the Marines repelled the Japanese artillery, and they drove the scout away from that position. So the U.S. Marines won that engagement, but it was a very difficult battle. That's the difficulties the U.S. Marines faced. Also, many Japanese hid in a lot of caves and a lot of bunkers in that area. And what happened was the U.S. Marines at first went into the caves and bunkers to stop the Japanese soldiers. But when one U.S. Marine went in one of the caves, a Japanese soldier shot and killed the U.S. Marines. So what the U.S. Marines did was they started putting grenades down the holes without going into the caves, because they were they did not want to lose any more Marines than they had to lose many times. And this was a sad situation. One of the caves was filled with the local people of Saipan were called the Chamorros, and this particular cave was filled with Chamorro schoolgirls. And I've seen pictures, and this is on Lost Evidence on the History Channel. This is not. This is public pictures of the U.S. Marines trying to carry these schoolgirls to safety and get them the proper medical treatment. Just a very, very sad situation. But the U.S. Marines did their very best to try to save as many girls, as many schoolgirls as they could have in that situation, because they really thought they were Japanese soldiers. They did not know they were Chamorro schoolgirls. Sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes in war, that happens. All right. So we talked about that. The next thing that we're going to talk about is that and also before we get into the next part of the battle, when the U.S. Marines were in the cane fields, those stalks of sugar cane can be about 10 or 12 feet high, much taller than any person. And so the Japanese snipers really shot and killed a lot of U.S. Marines, because a lot of the U.S. Marines could not see where they were. And so what they did was they used the flamethrower and burned down the sugarcane fields. They had to do that so they could see where they were. They could see where they were going, and they could see the enemy Japanese soldiers. All right. So then the Marines keep pushing forward. Then they wind up in an area called Death Valley. They nicknamed it Death Valley because so many Marines died in that area. It was a high ground, and the Japanese hid and concealed themselves very well in that area. And they won in the area of Death Valley, but they still lost many men, and they had to they made slow progress. Only about 2 or 3. They would go about 2 or 3 yards, and the Japanese would stop them, and the Marines would keep pushing 2 or 3 yards. Slow but steady progress. Also, during that same area, Japan tried to send their navy to rescue the Japanese ground forces. They sent many aircraft carriers, many battleships, and a lot of cruisers and destroyers. Well, U.S. submarines spot the aircraft carriers, and U.S. submarines sink one of them. Also, the Japanese pilots on those aircraft carriers did not have a lot of experience. A lot of the experienced Japanese fighter pilots died in the Battle of Midway. So the U.S. pilots had much more experience and were much better trained in this particular battle. This was not always the case, but in this battle they were. And the U.S. Marines shot down a lot of Japanese planes. This naval battle during this time was called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. So the U.S. Navy stopped any Japanese Navy. They stopped the Japanese Navy. So the Japanese Navy could not help the Japanese Army on the ground. So God bless the U.S. Navy for that. Okay. The next thing that happened was, the next thing that happened was the U.S. Marines keep pushing forward, and finally, on July 9th, 1944, the island of Saipan was declared secure, and the American flag was raised, the Japanese flag was taken down, and the sad part is, around this time, though, many Japanese civilians on the island, they believed that the American soldiers were going to capture and torture them and not treat them very well, which was not true a lot of the time. Sometimes it was true, but rarely did that happen. Usually the Japanese civilians were treated very, very well by the American soldiers. They were given candy bars, cola, water, anything the U.S. soldiers could spare, they gave to the Japanese civilians, particularly the children, the civilian children. But many of the Japanese civilians did not believe that, and they would throw their newborn babies off the cliff, and then they would jump off the cliff themselves and commit suicide, unfortunately. And this is just a bad situation. Now, there were Japanese-American interpreters, Americans of Japanese ancestry. One famous one from the island of Hawaii, territory of Hawaii at the time, was Bob Hoichi Kubo. and he won many medals for going down many cliffs down a rope and persuading many Japanese civilians to surrender and not to kill themselves. And many Japanese civilians bowed to him because they respected his effort and his ways to convince them to surrender. And the U.S. Marines were very, very grateful for the Japanese civilians they could convince to surrender. Actually, the Japanese Americans interpreters were in the Army, but they worked with the U.S. Marines a lot of times, so the U.S. Marines were extremely grateful for them. So, God bless the U.S. soldiers that fought in the U.S. soldiers, sailors, and Marines that fought in the Battle of Saipan. It was a tough battle. There was one particular division, the 105th Infantry, particular regiment, the 105th Infantry Regiment, that suffered a lot of casualties, and the bodies were just all over the island, and some of the, you could see maggots of flies coming out of some of their mouth and some of their ears. And I'm just trying to detail the battle because this is what these soldiers went through in the Pacific Theater to help keep Korea free, to help make Korea free, help free the island of Saipan from Japanese control, also to help from Imperial Japanese control. Also, this is what happened, and we need to remember this on December 7th. While we're remembering Pearl Harbor, we need to remember these other battles as well, and remember the sacrifices that a lot of these soldiers made. I mean, one U.S. soldier, a Japanese sniper, tried to shoot him, but he didn't shoot the Marine. He didn't shoot the U.S. Marine. He shot the Marine's rifle, though, and it was an area where he was supposed to reload the rifle, so the U.S. Marine's rifle was not functional, and he was trying to charge on the beach into the Japanese area, and he did that because it was his duty to his country. So, hope everybody's doing well. God bless the brave soldiers, sailors, and Marines that fought in the Battle of Saipan. So, hope everybody's doing well. Take care. God bless. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.